Hello and welcome to my kitchen. I'm Kayla and today I will be making homemade hamburger buns. To get started, the ingredients we are going to need is going to be 2.5 teaspoons instant dry yeast. I have it in a jar, so I'll be measuring it out, but you can also find it in a individual packet. And typically those packets are this measurement of the 2.5 teaspoons. You're also going to need 2 tablespoons of sugar, 1.5 teaspoons salt. I supplement this with Mommy Spice, which is a blend that I put together myself that has like onion and garlic and black pepper and sea salt. I put the same amount, the 2.5 teaspoons in, but I do that instead of just straight salt. 1 cup warm milk, a half a cup warm water, 1/4 cup melted salted butter, 4.5 cups all-purpose flour, 1 large egg, 1 tablespoon water, and 1 tablespoon of sesame seeds if you would like to add those into your recipe. And these last 3 ingredients, the egg, the water, and sesame seeds, will get put in, we'll use those at the end after we have our dough made before we put it in the oven. I will be working with a KitchenAid mixer today. If you don't have that available, you can use a hand mixer, and towards the end you can just get in there with your hands and mix it that way. And I'll get into that a little bit when we get a little bit closer. So our first step is going to be start adding our ingredients into our stand mixer, and it calls for warm milk, 1 cup. So I am going to be measuring that, and I like to measure over my sink so that if I make a mess, I don't have to clean it up later. It all just goes into my sink. So I am pouring and measuring the 1 cup of milk, and I'm going to put it into a microwave safe container because I'm going to warm that up. You want to warm up your milk slowly. So I'm going to do 30 seconds. And then I am going to check it and see how warm it is. It is important to have your starting ingredients, your liquid, your water, and your milk to be around 110 degrees. I don't typically use a thermometer or anything like that to check the temperature. What I do though is I use the inner side of my wrist. And so I have my water on and I have my wrist under it, and it's a little warm, so I'm going to turn down my water a little bit. So we treat our yeast like it is a baby. We need to give it warmth and food, or else it won't raise for us correctly. And I brought over my KitchenAid bowl directly over here to the sink as I was measuring out that half a cup of water. And it felt warm on my wrist, but wasn't too hot at all. So I'm going to say that's a good temperature. I'm going to put my KitchenAid bowl back on my stand. And now while I was getting the water, our milk was warming up. So let's see here. The milk needs a little bit longer. I just kind of dipped my finger in. I washed my hands really well before I started. I also gathered all my ingredients to make sure that I had everything I needed at hand while I was doing this recipe. So I'm going to put this milk back in for another 15 seconds. And I am going to move over to my butter. And I am going to put my butter, I have 1/4 a cup. I took a full stick, which is a half a cup, and I cut it in half to get my 1/4 a cup. And so now we will check the milk again. And now it's a really good temperature. Now I would say that this milk is about the temperature we need it. So I'm going to go ahead and pour it into my mixing bowl. So I have my water and my milk in there. My butter needs to be melted, so I'm going to melt it in the same container that I warmed up my milk because honestly, I just don't like to do extra dishes. And so again, I put that in a microwave safe container, and I am going to put it in for 30 seconds to start. While that is melting, I'm going to put away my milk, and then I'm going to start measuring my yeast. So I need 2.5 teaspoons of the yeast, and Like I said before, I have it in a jar, but you can buy it in individual packets. I prefer to buy it in the jar because I use yeast often. If you don't use yeast very often, the individual packets are a much better way to go with that. And so I'm just scooping into the jar with my measuring spoon and then using my finger to make sure that it's leveled off. Kind of here. So I got 2 teaspoons. I need a half a teaspoon more. All right. I just added my yeast into with the milk and the water. And I store my yeast in the refrigerator. It helps it last longer, and because with the warmth and stuff like that, if it got moisture in it at all, it would start to activate. So now that we have the yeast in, I am also going to add in, you can add in your 1.5 teaspoons of salt. And like I said, I'm using the Mama Spice blend that I make and I put together. And so we're doing 1.5. And like I said, I'm using my KitchenAid mixer. So I am gonna attach my paddle. I'll start with that, and then later on, once we get the flour and stuff in there, we'll switch over to the bread dough hook. So I am just attaching the paddle. The paddle is the flatter blade that you can put onto it. Lifting my bowl up, and now I am going to mix that up a little bit, and hopefully that's not too loud. I have the butter is all melted. The 30 seconds melted it perfectly. I let it set for just a couple seconds in there, and it's not too hot. I'm checking the temperature of it. We want to make sure we don't kill our yeast. So we got the milk and the water, give it its warmth. The salt and the sugar, which I'm going to put in now, 2 tablespoons of sugar. And again, for the sugar, you can just go ahead and you can scoop it and then make sure it's leveled off. And I like to use the handle of a spoon typically to level off. I have some flat handled spoons, the edge of it, to level off my ingredients. You can buy a specialty level and use that. It's just another thing I don't necessarily need, so I haven't gone ahead and done that. So I added in the 2 tablespoons of sugar now with the salt and the milk and all of that. Mix it up a little bit. I'm going to add in the butter. And I'm just going to pour the melted butter in here. And make sure it all gets out of the container. And make sure we want all our butter up in there. Yummy. And I'll turn on the mixer again for a couple, just to get that mixed up. It up a little bit, and then we'll start adding our flour. And then we're going to add 3.5 cups of flour to start and get that started mixing up, and then we'll add in the rest after we switch to the bread hook. And I'm just double checking my recipe real quick to make sure I got all my ingredients in here. I always double check it. So I'll put in like 3 or 4 ingredients, and then I go back to my recipe and I double check to make sure I didn't forget anything. So I'm going to put my half cup first. I always like to start with the smaller measurement, and that's just a personal preference. So then I can just move over to my 1 cup. Right now, I have my flour in a large container with a large mouth. I prefer this because when you're baking, you want to make sure your flour has kind of been sifted or mixed up. We don't ever want to pack, well, I won't say ever, unless your recipe calls for packed flour, you do not pack your flour. So what I do is I use a spoon and I just kind of mixed up the flour in the container, mix some air up in it to make it more fluffy. And then I hold my measuring cup over my container. Like I said, it's a wide mouth. It's probably a good 8 inches for an opening on this container I use. And I bake a lot, so it's very convenient. So I take my spoon and I scoop out some of the flour and I shake the spoon kind of over my measuring cup and I overfill it. I want to make sure it's overfilled. And then I take the handle of my spoon and I start at the handle of my measuring cup and I bring it forward across the top of the measuring cup to get the extra flour off. And then it's ready to be poured into my mixer. So I got a half a cup in there. The recipe calls for 3.5 cups. I am actually going to keep my half cup over here though, because the last couple measurements we're going to use the half cup for to make sure we don't put in too much, because kind of depending on your environment, if you live in a wetter environment, you may need more flour than if you live in a drier environment like I do. So I am measuring out my second cup. I noticed that towards the back of my measuring cup, I took the spoon handle and I slid it over the top. I noticed in the back corner of my measuring cup there wasn't enough flour, so I added a little bit more. So that's 1.5 cups in there. And we're going to put 3 in, and then we're going to turn on our mixer. 3 full and 1/2. So I'm measuring out my second one. Again, I'm just kind of scooping up the flour and using my spoon to kind of shake it into the cup so that it's not packed, and then level it off again. So that's 2, and then 1 more. A lot of times I will set my flour container on a cookie sheet so that if I do spill, I have less mess to clean up later. So I do that a lot. I measure either over the sink or I'll just slide a cookie sheet under whatever I'm measuring out to kind of keep my mess to a minimum because I'm kind of messy. So I have 3.5 cups of flour in my mixer. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn it on. And I'm going to put it on the first level of speed, the first one it clicks into first, let it get mixed up a little bit. And then I'm going to move it up to the second one. The second level on the KitchenAid mixer is usually used for bread. It's kind of the bread setting. You can use a hand mixer at this time if you have that. And if you don't, you could always try using a fork or something like that, although it will start to get pretty tough to mix by hand. I would definitely recommend that. Use something of a mixer. All right, so I just washed my hands again. So I'm gonna hop back over here to my mixer, and I can tell that my dough is definitely sticky. It's sticking to the sides of my bowl quite well, so that flour is nice and mixed in. At this point, I am going to lower my bowl and I'm going to take off my paddle attachment, and I'm using a rubber spatula to make sure I get as much of that dough off of here as I possibly can, because I don't want to waste any of this yummy dough. It smells really good. I can smell that seasoning in here that I put in. It makes it super yummy. It's very sticky. So we are just getting that all cleaned off. Getting that back in the bowl, and then we'll add in some more of our flour, and the recipe says to add in a half cup at a time, so we will do that. I almost got all this off, and then I use the rubber spatula around the outside edge of my bowl as well to make sure I get all that dough kind of started again in the center of my bowl when I put on the bread hook. So I'm doing that right now, kind of just pulling this dough away from the sides of the bowl because I want to make sure it all gets mixed in. And then I'm going to put my paddle attachment into my sink so it's out of the way. I got a little bit of dough on my fingers, so I am going to rinse that off real quick. Sorry for the water sound. This way you guys just know that if you're coming over for dinner tonight, my hamburger buns are going to only be touched with very clean hands. So now I'm going to take my bread hook and I'm attaching that to my machine. And to do that, you have to lower the bowl. Not all KitchenAid mixers have the bowl that lower. Some of them have the stand top that go upward. So it's very dependent on your model that you have. And I have a red one, and not that that matters, but her name is Cherry because I'm weird like that. I named her because I absolutely love my KitchenAid mixer. This is my second one. My mother-in-law broke my first one and I cried, and my husband bought me a new one, and luckily they were on sale and they came in red instead of the white they used to come in. So I just measured a half a cup of flour and put it in my mixer. My bowl is raised up. I have my bread hook in there, and I'm going to put it on the second level. And I'm going to mix for this last cup of flour I need. I'm adding it a half a cup at a time. You can make sure that it doesn't get too wet or too dry. All right, and I'm adding in my second half cup. I'm going to give that a second to mix in, and then I'm going to stop it, and I am going to see if the bread dough still feels moist or how it's feeling. You can kind of hear that the mixer is got a little bit of a different sound to it now than it did when we were just using the paddle. To me, it kind of sounds like it has more of a pulling sound to it. Okay, so I'm gonna turn that off. My dough, it's still kind of sticky. It's starting to form a ball more. I'm gonna use the rubber spatula again to kind of scrape the sides of my bowl. Make sure we get all that moist dough mixed in with this. So I'm just using the spatula, the rubber spatula, and I'm kind of scraping the sides of the bowl as well as the bottom of my bowl as much as I can, just to kind of get all that more into a ball shape in the center of my bowl. All right, and then I'm going to add this last half cup of flour, and I am going to turn my mixer back on. All right, and it's doing its thing real quick. So we're gonna mix it for a few minutes, probably like 2 to 3 minutes, and then I'm gonna check it again and kind of just see where we're at with the how the dough is feeling. If it's feeling too sticky or too dry, we want it to feel almost like a Play-Doh consistency, where it has some give where you can push on it a little bit and it dents in. But it will eventually be kind of elasticity, and when you poke it, it will, like with your thumb, it will come back out again after a moment and a little bit of time. So while that is mixing, I'm gonna put some of my tools in the sink. So once we get this to the consistency we want it at, mine is not quite becoming a ball yet, so I'm using my hand in here and I'm kind of just squishing it together to kind of get it to be more of a ball rather than some larger chunks. And this will help my my dough hook better knead it. So if you don't have a KitchenAid mixer or a bread hook for your mixer, this is the point where you would take out your dough and you would put it on your counter on a clean surface like a cutting mat or something like that, and you would knead it. And to knead dough, you take it and you make it into a ball, and you kind of push down to flatten your ball out, and then you fold the edges back over itself again. And you continuously do that until you kind of get a smooth dough. So that's kind of what the bread dough here is doing for me. So I don't have to do that, But if you don't have this option of the machine doing it for you, that is a good way of doing that. And you would want to do that again until your dough feels smooth, and you do not want it to be sticking to the touch. But you don't want it to be so firm that you can't manipulate it to fold it. Once my dough gets to the consistency that I want it to be at, we are going to transfer it into a greased bowl, and then we are going to let it rise for about an hour or so. So I'm going to double check this real quick. Yes, this is what we want. So my dough is in a ball and it feels smooth to the touch. I'm able to squeeze it and manipulate it with no problem. My hands are, when I squeeze it, and my hands are coming back pretty clean. There's a tiny bit of a, of a residue on them just from touching it, but my hands are not coming back feeling sticky or anything like that. So I like to raise my dough in my oven. It's just easier for me to do it that way, because I know that my oven is clean, and I typically will, if it's cold outside or cold in the house, I will turn my oven on for like 2 minutes, just enough to get it warmed up in there. And then I take my dough, put it in the greased bowl, I throw a dish towel over the top of it, and I set it in my oven after I turn it back off after those 2 minutes. And that's a pretty good environment for my dough to rise in. You could also just leave it on your counter, depending on the temperature of your home, or you can put it in the microwave, just to kind of have it set somewhere. So I will be back with you guys in an hour, and we will finish up this recipe. All right, so we are back, and I have checked my dough, and it has doubled in size. So I have it here in the bowl still. While it was raising, I took 2 cookie sheets and I greased them, and I preheated my oven to 400, so that while I am doing the next step here, which is going to be making the actual buns, that that can be preheating. So I have a cutting mat, or it's like a silicone mat down on my counter, and I'm just using that just in case. I did wipe down my counters and everything before I started, but I don't want to put my dough directly onto the counter still. So I took the dough out of the bowl. I have it here, and I'm just kneading it a couple more times before I divide it up into those bun sizes. So again, I made it into a ball, and then I took 2 hands and I smushed down on it, flattening out the ball, folding it over, and doing that again. And I just kind of did that a few times, about 4 or 5 times here, just to kind of get the dough that was on the outside mixed into the inside of my dough here. So our next step is going to be making these into the buns, and to do that, we start by making our dough into balls. So I'm just kind of ripping away some of my dough, and the size I found that work out pretty well for me, and I get that count of 12, is the size a little bit bigger than a tennis ball, somewhere between a tennis ball and a baseball size. And for me, that's both my hands cupped together, perfectly kind of fit around the dough. And I have a little bit smaller hands, so if you have larger hands, that won't necessarily be the exact measurement for you. And I like to make all of the balls all at one, all in a row before I put them on the pan, just in case I need to kind of take some dough from one and put it into another. once we get to the end, and make sure they're all kind of uniform in size. So I got 2 of them done, and again, I'm just kind of grabbing some of the dough and pulling it apart with one hand and holding the rest of it with the other, and adding and subtracting a little bit as I make it into balls, and I'm just cupping both of my hands, kind of squeezing the dough together a little bit, using my thumbs and fingers to kind of flatten, not flatten, but smooth out the dough ball. And so I continue doing this throughout the dough. Again, like I said, we preheated the oven to 400, and that's working. That's right now. Before I preheated my oven, I checked where my oven rack was, and it is in the center of my oven, right where I want it to be, because we don't want it to be too close to the heat at the bottom. We don't want our bottoms to get burnt, and we don't want it too far away from the heat, because then our centers won't get cooked. So having that rack right in the middle there works out pretty well. So once I get all these balls made, and there should be enough dough to make a dozen or 12 buns. And I have 6 done so far, so I'm trying to hurry here and not have too much time. I know that from my last experience, a half dozen per pan works out pretty well for me. It gives them room to spread out. And then once we get these balls made, we will put them on the cookie sheet, and we will press them down to flatten them. After we flatten the buns, that's when we're going to make an egg wash. And it's 1 egg to 1 tablespoon of water. And we will take a fork and whisk that up together. So, right. So we will do that now. I have enough of these balls made that I can get my first pan in the oven once the oven is preheated. So I just have a glass dish that I'm going to use to crack an egg into. Sorry for the delay. I forgot to get my egg out before I started recording again. So I always like to take a paper towel and I put it under the dish that I am cracking my egg into. So I have the napkin folded in half with my little dish on top of it. And then I take the edge of the egg and I hit it on the edge of the glass container, and then slowly pull the 2 parts of the eggs apart, and so the egg goes into the dish. This makes it, just in case when I hit the side of the container, I know that I'm not getting a bunch of egg everywhere. And then I'm using the opposite edge of the paper towel than the side, so I cracked it on the right side. I'm using the left side of the paper towel to wipe off my dish to make sure I get all that raw egg off. And then I'm able just to set the egg down on that paper towel, pick it up, and take it to the trash. So this is, especially when you're cracking multiple eggs, that makes it a lot easier to not drop eggshells when you're moving around your kitchen. So, and I'm just going to use a fork to mix up this egg. So I have the egg in the dish, and I need a tablespoon of water. And there we go. And again, I'm working right here next to the sink, over the sink when I did that. I'm just taking the fork and I am beating it. So I'm making kind of almost like a circular motion. I have the fork at an angle. So the tip is more in, and then the handle of the fork is higher up. And I'm just kind of doing almost like a circular motion to make sure I get that egg beat up well. And sometimes I will stab the egg yolk before I start beating it, kind of just to get it started, I guess. So now that I have my egg wash, and I am not doing sesame seeds today because I don't have them, and I'm good with buns without it. So I have my egg wash, and I have my what is it called? Pastry brush. And so now I'm going to take the balls that I made, and I'm going to place them on my cookie sheet. And like I said, I put tinfoil down on my cookie sheet, and then I greased it so that it's just easier to clean up later. So I'm going to put these in rows of 2. So I'll basically have 3 columns, or 3 columns and 2 rows on each pan, giving them enough room. So I'm just taking my hand, the palm of my hand, and I'm stacking my second hand on top of my first hand, and I'm just pressing straight down on the buns, the balls, to kind of flatten them out and make them more bun shaped. And then I'm just kind of feeling around it, and you can kind of press and prod it to make it be more circular if it didn't turn out that circular. And so I'm going to repeat that again. I'm just smushing directly down on it. There's a good probably 2 inches between the hamburger buns that I'm making. And it is really hard to get them to be perfectly circular. That's part of having homemade buns, I guess, is they're not perfectly circular, and that's okay. My patties that I make aren't always circular either. Exactly. So all right. So now I have 4 of my buns done. And just kind of shaping them a little bit as I'm pressing down on them again. And then I will take my pastry brush with my egg mixture, and I just wipe over it. And I like to go kind of start at one end of the bun. So I'll start away from me, and I will dip it in, brush it from left to right, dip it in, brush it left to right, and I continue to do that across all of the buns. Once we get that finished and my oven's preheated, it's not quite there yet, we're going to pop these in the oven for 12-ish minutes. I found that 12 minutes, that's what the recipe called for, and I found like that was a perfect amount of time for my buns to be done. And I am going to finish this up real quick, and then I will be back after they're done. All right, so the timer just went off for the buns, so I'm taking them out of the oven. I am using silicone mitts is what I do, and they almost go up to my elbows. So I took the first pan out, put it on the stove top, and then putting in my second pan because I did half and half. I was only able to get 11 buns today. I made them a little bit bigger, I guess, than I usually do. Alexa, set a timer for 12 minutes. Alexa, set a timer for 12 minutes. All right, so these buns, they smell amazing. They're kind of smooth on the top. They're very warm. And they, you can kind of tap them. They almost sound kind of hollow. I don't know if you guys can hear that. I hear the tinfoil more than the hollowness. But so these are done. I'm going to leave them on the pan for like 2-3 minutes, and then I'm going to put them on a cooling rack. And then once they're cool, I will put them in a Ziploc bag to store them. And then to cut them, you will use a bread knife. You want a nice long bread knife. Or you can do what I do, is I put them in my bagel cutter and I cut them that way. But you can use a bread knife and stand them up on their side This is really difficult. You want to be very careful not to cut your fingers. So however is easiest for you, you lay them, I'm thinking now laying them down flat on a cutting board and using a serrated bread knife would be best to cut these. Making sure that you're holding the top of the bun away from where you're cutting, so that you don't cut your fingers. And there we go. We pretty much have our buns. And like I said, I'm going to put them in my bagel cutter to cut them because that's a lot easier for me. It's a guillotine style bagel cutter. All right. Thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you all have an awesome day.